Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Ayesha Rahmanyar. She is a VP of Compliance at Equscript. Welcome, Ayesha.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Peter.
Well, thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career?
Absolutely. I have worked in healthcare my entire adult life. I did my bachelor's in biology and public health, and I always was interested in compliance work. So I started doing compliance work for a private laboratory as a manager, and I enjoyed it so much that it stuck with me, and I continued developing my skills there, and my interest just became higher and higher in the field. And then after that, I've mainly spent the last about 10 years of my working in healthcare technology companies as a compliance manager, director, and currently VP. I enjoy what I do a lot. I always want to learn more. And in order to fill the little bit of gap I have in my IT knowledge, I'm working on my master's currently in health information management and technology. And because that's not enough, on the side for fun as I'm working, some people listen to music. I listen to Coursera classes on cybersecurity and I'm working on my certification there as well. So, busy to say the least. I'm married. I have two beautiful boys, and I love to travel. So, and it's a little bit of everything about me.
Awesome. Well, appreciate the good summary there. So, obviously, we talk about the talent gap broadly in information security overall, and compliance is, is a part of that. So, do you think the talent gap in security is real? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
Absolutely. The gap is real. And I think part of it is because of the disconnect in a lot of companies between compliance and security. I think there needs to be more transparency between the two departments and not just the rigidness of, when you hear the word compliance, you think there's someone at the company coming to get you, or it's not comforting. I remember one of my old mentors told me that 10 years ago, when she would walk in the office, people would walk away from her, and so I want to think that this is part of the notion behind it, and I think a lot of the gap can be fulfilled by addressing the similarities and the goal orientation that both departments have. There's compliance cannot work unless there's the number one aspect of compliance is IT security, because it has to do with data, which has to do with PHI, which has to do with HIPAA. So it's all connected. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, and depending on the company, you could have security and compliance under the same umbrella. I know some companies tend to split it out, and they may, sounds like in your case, include other types of compliances beyond InfoSec. I guess, are there any skill sets that you think we're lacking as an industry, where there's just not enough people with that skill set? Because I think generally that's what people think of when they think of a talent gap, is we don't have enough people for a certain amount of jobs.
Yeah, I think there is a gap, and it's in two extremes. It's either we have people who are quote unquote overqualified, or ones who are not. But you could have someone who is considered overqualified on paper, has all the IT badges that you can think of. But then what the company is looking for is robust analytical skills that this individual might have not touched on for years. And so I think the gap lies there in really, truly understanding what is the requirement of a role, looking beyond the titles. I have worked with many different types of healthcare companies or IT companies, and the word data analysis entails different things in different companies. And I think the less we try to generalize it to some extent, it would help us understand better and help us produce the talent that we're looking for. I think that is in my experience, I've seen that happen a lot.
Yeah, well, and I think that happens often too, where a recruiter, if they're not a specialist in a given area, will default to looking for people with the same job title. In a lot of cases, they're going to miss people that have the requisite skills, but that may use different terminology for the things that they're doing. That's where that industry specialization really helps. So yeah, I think it's a good point that we need to get very, very specific on exactly what we need on day one, and what else can be filled in over time. And you also brought up the idea of being overqualified. That's one of the biases to me that is the most frustrating. When I hear from
it's very frustrating. Yes,
because wouldn't you want the most qualified person possible for your open job? And I think the steel man to that is if somebody's deemed overqualified, the hiring manager is afraid that, hey, because they are so heavily qualified, they're not going to be challenged or satisfied in this role.
Right. And a lot of times it's the other way around, right? Because I was deemed overqualified for certain jobs I really wanted. And so if you really wanted, you would do really well in it, right? Perhaps it's a slight shift in what you want to do. Perhaps it could be very well be financial reasons that shouldn't affect it. So I think, that bias needs to go away. Perhaps someone who's quote unquote overqualified will learn faster, will do better, and has the skills, the experience of working with various types of managers, various types of communication styles, and so will do really well in that aspect of the job. And so, I think that's a very frustrating bias. And I'm not ashamed to say that I had that in a very recent example. When I was hiring my current data analyst, HR sent me a resume of people who were lawyers. And right off the bat, I was thinking, okay, they have 2 semesters left to be a lawyer. Why would they want to work as a compliance analyst? That just doesn't make sense, right? And I learned in the process that it's exactly they wanted the experience and the knowledge for a couple of years to apply that as a lawyer. So compliance primarily works with the legal department. And so lawyers cannot be helpful in the compliance department if they don't have the background. And this person wanted to get that. And it would, they were very qualified in terms of their previous experiences, education, of course. But I want to say that I shied away from that resume. And then HR came back and said, you know what, this person really wanted to reiterate that. Please don't look at that. And they were contemplating not even putting it on their resume, right? And so now they worked with me for a few years, and we have a great connection. They got the experience they wanted, and now they're working because we have a lawyer at another company with the compliance lawyer. But I'm very happy to say that, we got what we wanted for a few years, right? They got, 3-4 years is a decent amount of time for an employee. So technically they were overqualified, but it worked out very well for both of us.
That's great that you were kind of able to challenge your assumptions, and that and also that you had an HR department that would vouch for somebody like that. Right. I find myself doing that quite often where, on paper, maybe somebody's not a fit. For whatever reason. But in speaking with the person, I'm able to tell a story about why they're interested in the role and why I think they're a good fit. And so that kind of goes to the idea of storytelling, I think, is such an important part of hiring. 1, as a hiring manager, 2, as a recruiter, and 3, as a job seeker. Like, that job seeker, if they weren't able to articulate why they were still interested in the role, despite the fact that, they weren't maybe the ideal fit on paper, if they weren't able to do that, you wouldn't have hired that person because they had to tell a story that then the HR had to relate to you. There's a lot of steps involved.
And honestly, and to the opposite of that, I've had the experience of interviewing people. I will never forget this interview in my life. It was just the eye opener and like the most shocking interview I've seen in my life with a person who was very good on paper. This person looked like I read through the resume for a few minutes and I said, this is who I want. So I'm expecting to go in this interview and, get some insights and perhaps I think I found my person. I log into the interview, after some logistics of rescheduling and, giving them the benefit of the doubt. It's okay. I log into the interview and this person is a little late and then they're in their car. Not only are they in their car, they are driving as they're speaking to me. So it's a danger right there. And the way they're speaking and, for a lack of a better word, the immaturity, for me, that person could have been qualified to do this job, but they kind of like hit themselves in the hammer by being disrespectful to the job, right? So I've had those experiences happen as well, where it's just interview 101, sit in a place where where it's quiet, close, and you can reschedule. You don't have to be driving. And in the end, I actually said, I actually feel uncomfortable because your eyes are going all in and out of the road, and I don't want to be the reason why there's an accident. And this was from the same pool, right? So you have both. And then now with the introduction of AI, whereas, I was told by my college mentor that the hardest job is finding a job. And it's true, right? Because of the fit and where you want to be, what you want to do. Where it used to be was you looked at a job description and it worked for you. You made sure your resume fit and perhaps changed the wordings to reflect the same meaning, but to help the technology pick it up. Well, now nobody has to go through the trouble of, doing that because AI will do it for you. And so in some ways it has made hiring more challenging, and in some ways it's made it easier. Whereas you cannot judge as much as you could from what's on paper, because that can just be, fixed. So I think it's important that hiring managers, HR, get a better understanding and look beyond titles and, perhaps on some level overqualified experience and things like that. And I like what you mentioned about storytelling. I think some of it involves personal storytelling. I think we should make it a norm into talking about, a little more personal. So what do you want to be? Where do you see yourself? And, would this be a good fit for you based on your life story, essentially?
Yeah, well, and hiring is part art and part science. And I often wonder what percentage breakdown should there actually be? It's like you want to be consistent in your interviewing, where you have certain core questions that you're asking every single candidate to make sure that you're not being biased. But
right.
At some level, there's some sort of individual judgment call that you're making as well, based on intangibles that maybe you can't always articulate properly. It's like,
right.
What does culture fit mean? What does team fit mean? How would you evaluate something like that and ensure that you're not being biased in some way?
Mm-hmm. So I think the way I like to do it is a little on the side of behavioral questions, but a lot focused on examples. I think that gives you a good idea of, like you said, quote unquote, culture fit, and then the personal story of it. What type of manager do you like working with? What type do you don't like working with? But articulate it in a way where it's storytelling, where it doesn't even feel that much like an interview. Question, answer. Those interviews are not useful anymore. I think it's best if it's like a larger conversation. And that way you get a better understanding of, will this person be a better culture fit based on how they respond to some of the questions and examples? And that cannot be the only metric, but as of now, it's the best you could do to see if they would fit. And then I also think your intuition also has a little bit to do with it, right? Usually, you're not way off when you speak with someone in a professional setting. You can get an idea of their enthusiasm, or how much do they want it. The more you want the job, the more I want to give it to you, right?
Yeah, that's certainly true. Yeah, intuition is one of those things where I feel like you need to be really careful about it, because I've had plenty of candidates rejected over the years for what was called culture fit, but they didn't really give me any exact reason as to
What is
why.
culture?
That was just a blanket
Right.
term. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, did they just not like their haircut? Was it some immutable characteristic they had? Like, what was it actually? Because if I don't know what it is actually, I can't screen for that. And then I think in a lot of cases, or in some cases, it's actually an illegal thing, and they just don't want to admit what's actually going on, how the decision was actually made. But as a recruiter, often I'm caught in the middle where I'm just guessing, and I have to make an educated guess sometimes.
Kind of plays into unconscious bias, right? I remember going through a presentation on that and realizing a few things that humans have in their mind. I used to, when I was in college, used to teach a pharmacy teaching program, and I would help students apply for jobs and get for jobs and give career advice. And one of the things I would say is that, and this is not popular, but I am open about it. I would say is that where you are in your careers, you're starting something new, you're getting into a field you've never been to before. So you want to avoid the outside noise as much as possible so that they view you and your skills. And what I mean by that is just the simple things that, for example, you have a very large tattoo in your arm. Now that could go either way, right? I wouldn't take the risk. This is not the time to work through those things, and let's follow the more traditional method of long sleeve shirt. You never know. You could be rejected for how you look, what you're wearing, your hair color, all kinds of things. You would never know. You could essentially never prove it. You could assume, but what you want to do is try to reduce that as much as possible. And that's that, first impressions matter. And you want to make yourself, presentable in a way to try to avoid those judgments as much as possible. Now, that's from a hiring perspective. Now, from the perspective of an HR recruiter, it's even more difficult because they have so many candidates and they want to quickly, narrow down the list. But it's important for them to pause and see. Let me just think before I quickly say, okay, I have 100 applicants and I'm going to quickly move the 50 out of here, to look past the algorithm a little bit, and try to be more aware of your personal unconscious bias or perhaps, current events that, are in our minds and we don't know how it affects us, but it does. And it's a hard one to tackle, but it's important.
Yeah. Well, just a little self-reflection, whether you're, a candidate or a hiring manager, and understanding, and it helps to have somebody to push back, like often I'll ask a client, well, you say they're not a culture fit. What does that mean? So if I didn't ask that, they probably wouldn't actually think about it, if they haven't already, or maybe they have and they're just not wanting to say the real reason. And on the candidate side, recently I had a gal, she had some pretty extensive tattoos. She had a sleeve and she was going in for a sales role. And that was one of her questions to me prior to going to the on-site interview was, hey, how do they feel about tattoos? She was self-aware enough to know that if they're more conservative, maybe I need to cover up. And I asked the hiring manager, because I know them very well and they're my favorite client of all time. And he said, yeah, no problem, not a problem at all. But if she hadn't asked and it had been that situation that she was walking into, she very well could have been disqualified for something that was very much in her control.
Right. Exactly. So, I had an example of that where at the last company I worked for, our CISO was, quote unquote, like a very, macho-ish man who appeared very much like cowboy style. And, this persona that he gave, very, very kind gentleman. And the person the lawyer that he had hired was very, very liberal, and was concerned after he was hired that he was very worried at that interview, not because of his qualifications, which he clearly had and was hired, but because of what this person was giving off, and he assumed that he was giving off vibes that he wouldn't like a person as liberal as him, and it wouldn't work because their personalities are so different, and so perhaps that wouldn't be the right culture fit, right? But I'm so happy that it was actually the best culture fit, and up until I was there at the company, we would have daily chats, and it was like a joke. They would joke with each other all the time. But right off the bat, you would never think these two people could even, sit in a room together. And that's how the candidate felt too, right? So the lesson here is that the manager was able to look past that and talk in a way that made him feel comfortable enough that, quote unquote, it's not it doesn't look like a good culture fit, but you are a great culture fit for us.
Yeah, I think the takeaway for me here is, and with a lot of the things we've spoken about so far, is just be cognizant that you're making assumptions and try to avoid making assumptions wherever possible. Mm-hmm. Treat every company, every interview, every individual, every candidate like the individual that they are, and not try to force people into some box or category and make decisions based on that category. Do it based on the individual in front of you, and really challenge your assumptions, challenge your in some cases, biases, and think about why you're making your decisions. I think a lot of us are so busy nowadays that we just kind of fly through work, kind of almost on autopilot, where we don't sit down and reflect a little bit.
I think another thing, which I know we talked about last week as well, and it reminded me of something that I did when I went first from my lab biology, testing, medicine, that environment, to the technology side of healthcare, where I'm just in front of a desk all the time. I don't have a lab. I'm not walking around in scrubs, was the terminology. And some of the certifications and the audits and what they're called. It's very overwhelming. And for someone who might actually know how to do those things, but is just in a different setting. And I remember when I first started my career 10 years ago, I created a glossary at work of all the terms. And it was so funny because people started using it. I think it became an item of HR. They loved it because it was helping them. I think we need to have something like that for hiring managers. It's not likely that every hiring manager or recruiter will know terminology or different things of every department. They're hiring for finance, for operations, for technology, you name it. But I think if we have a few of those, and then give them perhaps the names of the certifications and audits, and then say how different or similar they might be, it would really help bridge the gap that we have. And I think I experienced that. So my experience was in auditing claims for a small private lab, and role of a huge aspect of compliance is auditing and monitoring. So someone who has done that, the concept is the same, right? You want to check for metrics, prepare a framework, put it together, test it, change it, look at the results. But if you throw me the word of a HHS audit, that's going to scare me, right? But the concept is the same. Yes, you will need some background info and, adjust your requirements. But if you have experience doing any kind of audit in healthcare, you're already starting in the middle. You're not starting from scratch. Terms like high trust audit, it used to be so scary, and now, I try to tell people, and that in my experience, I've become really, really good at this. But if you hear me talk about it, you wouldn't think I'm a compliance person. You would think I'm not a VP of compliance. I'm a CISO, but I'm not, because it goes hand in hand. They have audits, frameworks. But if you dig deep, where are those frameworks coming from? They're coming from requirements that are coming from the law or standards that is law and compliance. And then it just trickles down. So you have to be able to make the connection. And I think that's the biggest gap that we have, not being able to put those together.
Looking for underlying skills, not necessarily the specific terminology, is and intangibles too. It's so funny you mentioned a glossary like that. I essentially did the same thing when I created a training for recruiters, because I was thinking about, how do I train somebody who's never recruited one? So I created a recruiter training section,
right.
And then just to get them familiar with Boolean searching and all these different recruiter things. And then I also created a training for basic InfoSec knowledge, where I included all the acronyms and not only the definitions for the things, but in my own words, what those terms meant as a non-technical person, and what some synonyms for each of those terms might be. So if they see something else and not that exact term, they know, oh, that's kind of the same thing. So you get people thinking about parallels and relationships between terms, those sorts of things versus that specific term on the page, which I don't necessarily know if everybody's wired to be like pattern recognition spotting like that, but that's just kind of how I am. Any sort of intangibles that you look for when you hire somebody?
No, not necessarily. I look, primarily big picture and then details. One other thing that just crossed my mind is you mentioned recruiter, and I wanted to say, depending on the company size and budget, you could have a recruiting department with multiple recruiters, or you could have one recruiter, or you could have 0 recruiters and it's just the HR generalist, or even more granular, you could have just one HR president and they're doing everything, right? So the working with recruiters of larger companies who recruit for specific roles, it's impressive how much they know, and they know exactly what to look for. And when they interview, you know that they are very well aware of what this role entails. But that it's not necessarily true for someone who doesn't have that knowledge and experience. And so how to bridge that gap is important. And that is one of the things I did. And I gave some terminology to my recruiter, and I said, listen, here are a few things I want you to talk about and see if I can get in candidates. And I know for the most part, she couldn't find that. And I think you're right in saying we need training, whether it's for recruiters or hiring managers in either level. We need to have a generalized training, like what you said, perhaps as a requirement of, here's what we're looking for. And then a little more on the specialized side to help you find the talent, because the talent is there. It's about finding it.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people don't realize for somebody who does a lot of outbound recruiting, quote unquote, or headhunting, as they say, like I do, I would say almost the majority of my time is spent sourcing candidates, going through LinkedIn profiles and conducting searches and refining searches and sending messages. That's a lot of work on the front end. But in order to do all of that, I have to know the terminology. I have to have done my research. If there's any shortcut to that, especially for a recruiter who's not a generalist, like a glossary, that would be a huge time savings, because it's not easy or quick to learn all of these terms and understand the relationships between terms and a lot of these intangible things that's so hard to train somebody in. It's like they can really only get it in some cases just by doing it. Which there's no shortcut to experience. You just have to experience it. So
I think one example I had for one of the roles that I created was, I don't want to call it a task, but something similar, where like a hands-on activity and see how they respond to it. It's not just to see, overall, how do you answer questions? Not a quiz, but perhaps an activity where I discuss a common problem and what is your approach and how you solve it. And then you keep going off of that. What technologies would you use? If you don't have, your first choice of technology available to you? How else could you accomplish this? And going off of that, actual work examples, things that they would be doing or things that you would want them to do, I think that's something we need to focus on a little more, past the behavioral generalized questions of your weaknesses, your strengths. Those are, at this point, I think, as people communicate with each other, you can get a good grasp of that, right? So I think focus should be for hiring managers, perhaps to do the shift, perhaps have the first round to focus on behavioral questions and see if they fit. And then for the hiring manager to actually go through examples and questions related to the actual work. I think it will give us a better idea, and then we could spot talent easier. You mentioned LinkedIn. One thing that bothers me so much is qualified people with amazing resumes and horrible LinkedIn pages that doesn't reflect their resume, right? And vice versa. So that's something that as a person looking for a job, you have to pay attention to. And then have it in the back of your mind as a recruiter that you have to train your mind to not quickly say no because the profile is not, doesn't look like this person would be qualified. Well, in fact, that might be the exact person you're looking for, because you want them to do analysis work sitting at a computer, and they're perhaps they're an introvert, and that's why their LinkedIn page is not updated. But they are the exact person you need for the skills that they have to do this type of engineering work that doesn't involve a whole lot of customer-facing, client-facing, and it's just very much technical. So you just, like you said, it's just experience and try to train your mind as much as possible to look past what you normally think are, good metrics to judge a person who's applying.
Yeah, well, in some cases, I'll reach out to somebody on LinkedIn because of what they don't have in their LinkedIn profile, of all things.
Right.
And that's where I don't think the AI tools have really caught up to a good seasoned human sourcer yet, is that they can't make those judgment calls. They're looking for a series of terms. And yes, we do that as recruiters, but we're also looking for things that aren't there or things that might be there if this other thing is true. It's very conditional. And we evaluate each profile individually based on the circumstances surrounding that individual profile. And, the tooling just hasn't caught up yet. But a lot of people think that it has. And maybe it has compared to maybe some less seasoned sourcers or recruiters. But it's so important not to, again, make assumptions and look past the surface and think about why might not they have all this information on there. I talk to a lot of people that say they don't include anything on the resume for OPSEC purposes, that they just don't want to include any information about their environment. And I always counter with, I get that, but I can't find you if you have 0 keywords in your profile. You have to have something. And there are ways to do it, instead of saying which SIM you work with specifically, you just say administered SIM and set up rules. And, you can say that without giving away too much about your individual environment or, which compliance frameworks you're working with. I don't see how a threat actor could use that against you necessarily. Maybe that's just my ignorance showing, but there are ways to do it, I guess.
Yeah, and because I'm a compliance person and I actually enjoy compliance work and standardizations and following standards and creating new standards, I think I would want AI or tools to master something that I have actually, and I want to ask you what you think about this, that I've learned from a lot of recruiters during the days when I was a job seeker a couple of years ago. This is something new I learned, that when you, for example, LinkedIn, you look for a job and you're applying and it says 500 applicants, the immediate thought in your mind is, what are the chances that I am one of the top 20 even for this role? I really don't think I'm there, so I'm not going to do it. I heard multiple recruiters, including recruiters in who are my friends and family, tell me, don't ever be discouraged by that, because a lot of people will click on that who are nowhere near who don't meet the qualifications, let alone the qualifications, they actually might not even be interested in the job. And it's just like a click. And I would want for the future to have some restrictions around, people who apply, perhaps to make it a little better for recruiters. A silly example, but believe it or not, I have seen it. Sometimes it could be for reasons to meet a quota. Sometimes it could be because perhaps you are applying for unemployment and you have to show that you have applied for certain jobs, and your goal is to, maybe that week you just want to get this requirement in and then focus on your job hunt later. You will just apply for whatever. You're a chef who's going to apply for a plumber job, right? It should perhaps some standard or some block that would not allow that in one way, right? Where if your resume or your profile is not matching by a certain percentage of not necessarily the exact keywords of the job, but just overall picture, that I think AI can be trained to be smart like that, where it wouldn't even pick those. And over time, this technology could become more and more precise. And that's, how, and that theory was proven because most of the roles that I'm in, the last 3 roles have been through LinkedIn, and have had maximum number of applicants where if I had not learned this from the recruiter, I would have thought, I don't have a chance, because what are the chances that out of 500 I'm there? But I was told that from that 500, you could slice half that are not even related remotely to the job, not just as a background and qualification, but also as an interest of actually wanting this job. So,
yeah, I mean, I haven't posted a job since 2014, I think. And when I did, I distinctly remember this. It was like an IT auditor job for the audit firm that I worked for. And I posted a job and I got like bus drivers and cops and all sorts of different folks, and nothing against those professions, but they're not doing IT audits. So it was at that point I realized, hey, this doesn't really work in this field. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to go find people like I did for software engineers and systems architects and stuff like that during my K-Force days. And so that's basically what I've done ever since, is just go out and search for people. And as the AI tooling gets better on the candidate application side, where people are able to tailor their resumes directly to the job spec, it's going to be more and more difficult for people fielding all these applications to figure out who actually has the skills and who doesn't, if they all kind of look the same. So that's where I think a LinkedIn profile, which is almost kind of like a living document because it's updated by the individual as things change, versus LinkedIn or a resume, which is a little bit more static at least. And you can see their post history and all of this stuff.
It's a connection, right? What are they interested in? What type of events are they attending? That's how I have come across some great things in the compliance field because of that. I didn't want to forget to mention that you could have career changes with, where people who weren't fit and are looking into a career change or perhaps have had the education to change it. Not to exclude those individuals, of course, but I think there is there can be a higher level screening. So because where I think we're headed, and it's not going to be fun for you or me eventually, is that I think where we're headed is to, as you get a pool of applications, you're going to kind of do an audit instead of looking through resumes, because eventually all of them or most of them will look that they match the job, because everyone will use AI to make it fit the description. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to do a sampling and say, select this many percentage of resume and let's meet all of them. It's going to become like that, right? Which might not be a difficult thing in the beginning, but I think we're getting very close to not seeing the resumes, the static ones especially, and relying more heavily on on the technology side of it, and just screening by meeting instead of, screening by meeting as the first step, which is not the first step right now. So I think that's where we are headed.
Well, and my advice to job seekers nowadays is largely don't waste your time with applications, because there is so much noise, and 95% roughly of applications are not qualified for the job, and there's that remaining 5% is just completely drowned out by all of the noise. So even if you are a really good fit for a role, chances are there's so much competition, even if it's not good competition, that your resume never gets viewed by a human. So ironically, the more noise, the more automation is being used, the more people-oriented, real human connections matter. Those relationships matter. And right. I don't know. I think as we continue to see this, I call it convergent evolution of resumes happen, the relationships are going to become more and more important. And eventually everybody's just going to abandon the tech. Well, not everybody. Some people will, because they'll see that this is happening and realize, hey, this isn't effective anymore. If we're having to take random samplings of resumes, there's no way to select based on what we actually want. And we're just shooting in the dark.
I think what you just mentioned resonated with me. You said, of connections and instead of the technology. I recently have dealt with this situation. I think it's a little safe to say that I would rather work with someone who is very organized, very precise, can work on their own. And it's okay if they're lacking one or two skills that I would prefer them to have than the other way around. For someone to have all the skills, and I know you have all the skills, because you've proven to me that you can do this work, but you don't have the organization, you don't have the drive. And so even though you have the skill, it's not helping me because you're not using it in the way that I want you to use it. So I have to micromanage you or keep telling you and ask you to be proactive. So I'd rather, in my experience, it's less headache for me as a manager, as a VP, to have someone that I could maybe help learn a skill or two, specifically in data analysis, simple computer work or Excel, for example. I worked with someone who was very great to work with, and she was missing the Excel skills that I needed, but like you said, the culture fit, the requirements, and just making sure everything's done was all there. And so I had her take a few courses, do some tutorials with her, and she got a grasp of it. For the level of analysis work that I wanted, she made it work, right? So had I seen her resume apply for this position, there's no way it would cut through, right? But that person ended up being a great worker for me because they filled the gaps as they're working in some of the things that I needed, but had the right attitude. And I've had the opposite problem where I have someone who has a lot of skill, but no drive. I normally say this to people, I'm biased, and I talk, most of the people I work with know this about me. I don't get people who are not ambitious. I don't understand. I cannot connect with you. So I can only work with you to a certain level. After that, I can't. If you're not a type of person who wants to continuously learn, it doesn't have to be at a fast pace, and you're not ambitious, I can't work with you. So I'd rather have a person like that who might be missing a skill or two, but has the background that they need, the educational background for the most part, and we can work on the skills together. And there's so much out there in terms of how to learn different skills. I mentioned I'm learning SQL on the side as I work on my on my daily tasks. I listen to the music of how to work with SQL. So but there's so much out there that you could do, but you need to have the drive. For me, that's more important.
Yeah, you can't really train internal locus of control or motivation or. those are things that I think are innate to people. And I think you can nudge people maybe in one direction a little bit, but you can't fundamentally change somebody's orientation.
No, they have to want it. They have to want it. And if they don't, it becomes a challenge.
For sure. Well, that's a great point. We're coming up on time. So just one last question for you, Ayesha. Is there anything that we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Yeah, I think what we need to talk about a little is how IT ties in with compliance. I think we are missing it a little bit. To have more transparency and more resources in that aspect, that they go hand in hand. You just have to look deeper into it. And I think a lot of compliance work is dependent on IT because now everything is technology. And so I really want to advocate for the need to educate and, bring awareness to it goes back to not strictly look at the one word compliance and look beyond that. It's actually governance, risk, and compliance, GRC, right? And IT all falls under there. So that's something that I would hope for to make happen that we don't necessarily talk about now.
For sure. Well, and I would imagine on an individual company basis, it often comes down to how good are the people skills of the people on the compliance team to make the IT folks understand that, hey, we're not the enemy. We're on the same team. Here's how we
speak their language. I like to speak your language. I like to present information and how best you understand it. And this is the last point I wanted to make. I can convey the same message in different ways to different groups. I will talk to my engineers differently to convey something, and to the operations team differently, to the HR folks differently, but essentially the backbone of it is the same. And that's why I call it, speak their language, learn to speak in their language that helps them better understand and helps you understand them. So,
awesome. Well, if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do so?
Through my LinkedIn. My contact information is there. That's the best way to reach me.
Excellent. Well, thanks for your time, Ayesha. Thanks, everybody.
Nice speaking with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.